Lay back, close your eyes, and come with us on a trip through the prism as we discuss the epic album from Pink Floyd, Dark Side of the Moon. Stay with us. Welcome, one and all friends, people that are not friends yet, people that will be friends. Welcome, everybody, to the 3324 podcast. You have found the best in music and movie podcasting. Dean Legiro here behind the microphone. Eric Kuber also behind the microphone, but not this. We're not the same microphone. It's like we're singing like vocals together and we're in the same microphone. He's in a different one.
I'm at a different one, different location.
It's not like the Beach Boys.
Right. Hello, everyone. Good evening.
How are you?
I'm good. Yourself?
Doing very well.
It's cold.
So we're on social media. You can find us at 3324 Podcast. That'll work on Instagram and Facebook. We do two live shows per month. Or depending on the month, maybe it would be 3.
Mm-hmm.
But we do that, so you can check us out there. That's a really fun way to interact and engage with us. We have a blast there. We've got a Facebook group that is booming and blossoming in advance of spring. This is like springing early for us, so come and join us there as well. There's a lot of great information and a like-minded community.
Welcome to all our new members. It's amazing. Every day, almost every... We're catching 3, 4. Hey, this guy, that guy. Whoa, welcome all.
Yeah, and I'm only paying like $5 each for them. So no, we're not paying for anybody. They do it for the genuine love of music and movies. Like we do this podcast every week for you.
Mm-hmm.
So let's jump in. We're talking about Dark Side of the Mood. Dark Side of the Moon from Pink Floyd. So this is a really something I'm surprised we hadn't gotten to early. We were Eric and I. We kind of did our year-end recap and kind of looked at what we did, things we want to talk about, things we need to get to, and this was kind of relatively high on the list of something that we needed to talk about.
Yeah, it was definitely one of the premier, or I suppose the premier progressive rock albums of all time. I would have to say. I mean, it may not be everyone's favorite in that sense. I mean, I know there's everybody has their favorites. Everybody has their go-to album, but this album in itself is just I don't know. How do we talk about it? How do we explain it?
I don't know. It's going to be interesting. I think in the open I said epic, and I think that's what this album might be, is not necessarily epic in its scale or its scope. I think it's just epic in for a lot of different reasons, which we'll go into because it's a very interesting album. So let's do the stats, and I think the stats will uncover some of this conversation for us.
Mm-hmm.
We're going to be like Sam Neill in Jurassic Park, digging for that raptor claw, and very lightly with the brushing away the material till we get to the heart of the matter.
Yep.
And then we're going to threaten to open up that kid's stomach with the raptor claw.
or blow his mind, one of the two. Here, have a little toke of this, and then listen.
That's it. That's what happened with this album. That was a big probably reason for this album. But let's see. The stats are: this was released in March 1st, 1973. So it's coming 49 years, coming on its 49th birthday. 14 times platinum. And that's a kind of a stat that's a moving target. Because it's 14 million copies sold or in excess, but the numbers are probably far more than that because this album sold a ton before they even started tracking that, the platinum status. So the numbers could be wildly out of range. 2 singles from the album, actually, believe it or not, 2 singles were released from this album. Money, which went to number 13 on the Billboard charts, and then Us and Them, which didn't really do anything.
Which I'm actually surprised that Time was not the A side of that. I had no idea that Us and Them was the actual.
That's such a long song. Well, Us and Them was a separate single. So there was Money was one, and then Us and Them, and Us and Them didn't do it. And those are probably the 2 most accessible if you're talking about radio songs.
Sure. Yeah.
That's about it, honestly. And I don't mean that in a bad way. It's just that's the way this album is. It hit number 1 for 1 week. 1 week only on the Billboard charts. But, and this is, you got to take a moment and take this statistic in. Okay, I'm going to lay this out, and you really have to kind of take this statistic in, everybody that's listening. It hit number 1 for 1 week on the Billboard charts, but it stayed in the top 200 Billboard album chart for 736 consecutive weeks. It was on the charts for 14 years straight, never leaving the album chart.
It's amazing.
Okay, take that in for a second. This album was on the charts for 14 years, never leaving.
Yeah. Yep.
Okay, and that that was 14.1 years. So it exited in July of 1988. It left. It came back briefly for another couple of weeks. And then Billboard started another chart. They started a new chart called Catalog Album Chart, meaning like kind of older albums. They were tracking the sales of that.
Yeah.
It re-entered that chart. And it's been, I think, over altogether, over 1,500 weeks on the charts.
That's astounding. Absolutely amazing.
This is just, so this is done, and no other album. I think the closest one is a Bob Marley album, but it's not even close to this.
Yeah.
When you think about an album staying on the charts for 14 years and it was number 1 for 1 week and had no discernible chart hits.
Yeah.
Eric, what do you make of that?
I don't know what to make of it, honestly, because I just think that it was such a breakthrough in terms of its what it was. It was just a grand experiment, a sonic experiment. It was unlike anything. There was a psychedelic period, going, but the earlier stuff with Floyd was a lot long-winded. It was more, sort of. It
was definitely more psychedelic and trippy.
Yeah, and that this thing was like they were experimenting with looping and vocal effects and sound effects, and to such a degree that I think it really took it to a whole new level. Other people have done it, of course, including the Beatles, and but with Floyd, it was more. Everything was so layered in the recording process that it was just. I don't think anybody has ever surpassed it, and people have tried to do this kind of thing, all the time, but it's never been. In my opinion, like it's one of the best cohesive pieces of sonic material. It's not even you don't even know where music begins and sound effects end. It's kind of like it's so blended.
And when we talk about progressive rock, right, which Eric is the resident expert, I'm like the Anakin Skywalker to his Qui-Gon Jinn. But one of the words that gets thrown around with progressive rock when it's not done well is it's pompous and it's
yes,
overblown and kind of it's like too much. Why isn't this that though? Why isn't this pompous and overblown? And because it very well could be. It's a very interesting album.
It is, and I think what it is that they found their niche. They found that everything was kind of it all came together, and admittingly so even to them, because I think the feuding between Waters and Gilmour was already starting at this point. Waters was such a devotee of Syd Barrett that would never leave him. That would always haunt him all the way up to the wall. Writing about this guy going insane, and that became like a reoccurring theme for Roger Waters. And so at this point.
Let's stop there for a second. Let's talk about that a little bit just to get people caught up. So Pink Floyd was formed in 1964 originally. Okay. The lineup for Dark Side of the Moon, David Gilmour on guitar, Roger Waters on bass. They did a lot of other things. These are like the they played synthesizers, the skeletal version of what they did.
This is this is what they're known for.
Yeah,
primarily
Richard Wright on keyboards and Nick Mason on drums. Yeah. And when you mentioned Syd Barrett, he was the founder of Pink Floyd. And that original incarnation of Pink Floyd was very much in the psychedelia era, the mid to late 60s. There's conflicting stories about Syd Barrett, but most of them are basically around too much LSD, too much acid, possible mental issues. And he just kind of cracked and literally kind of lost lost his way, and it became untenable for Pink Floyd to continue with him. So they kind of let him go. But so when you talk about the spirit of Sid, that's what it is Sid Barrett left Pink Floyd, and he was the leader of the band. And they actually got dropped by their label, their original label, when Sid Barrett left, because like, well, this guy's the leader. Who are you guys? So, we're going to actually follow him. So he was a pretty significant. He cast a long shadow in Pink Floyd.
Yeah. Yeah. Like, as I mentioned, especially with Roger Waters. I mean, he was such a, when you think of The Wall, like all the way to 79, and that whole album to me he's still talking about Sid Barrett. I mean, the character of Pink is Sid Barrett. There's no, and his presence is felt on this record, because
this album as well.
It deals with madness and insanity and death and all, every life in general. A lot
of different themes running through this album.
Exactly. But I think
a lot of themes.
Getting back to the point of what is it about this record that doesn't seem as overblown and as pompous as some other acts out there.
Pretentious was the word I was looking for too, right? Like pretentious, you hear a lot in.
Well, I think a lot of it has to do with these virtuosic musicians too, who you have all this talent and everybody's trying to play over one another. And groups like you find that a lot in groups like Yes and King Crimson and like ELP and these acts, because they're so strong in what they did and so good that everybody wanted their moment to shine. Right. With Floyd, I think it was agreed that it had to be a little bit more cohesive and more more of a group effort, because everybody kind of played their role and especially
while
on
still
this
being
record,
experimental. That
exactly.
needs to be noted is cohesive, but these songs most of these songs were worked up live beforehand and kind of experimented and taking out a lot of the long jams that if left in might have been called pretentious and overblown. Right. So you said kind of refining it, which is what they did is took them out live and fooled around with these ideas and then kind of said, okay, let's go into the studio and
more studio experimentation. And everybody was of the same mind set. Everybody had the same goal in mind, is to make something, just put something down, and everybody was digging that. Everybody was digging experimenting with sounds and all textures and all that kind of thing. So, and then you have this wonderful engineer.
You stole my thunder.
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Go ahead. I'll introduce it. I'll introduce it. Making his second appearance on the 3324 podcast as an engineer, first seen in the Beatles documentary Get Back. We welcome
Alan Parsons. Yeah, so he went on to bigger things. I mean, he working with Floyd, and then of course he went off and did his own progressive rock stuff on his own, like called the Alan Parsons Project. What was the name of that
band? It's very hard to remember.
The Alan Parsons Project.
Oh, he named it after himself. Go, Alan.
And you could actually tell, and if you listen to a lot of their stuff, you could actually hear what he had been doing with both the Beatles and with Floyd, and a lot of that, just kind of carried over to what he was doing, and of course he knew exactly, but he's one of those studio magicians. Yeah, he said all in later years, I think Waters downplayed Alan Parsons' influence. Like, he really, he's just a guy, but I think. I don't think so.
I think Nick Mason said, no, that's not true. And Alan Parsons had a little
bit
of sour grapes.
Role.
Like, you know what? These guys made out like bandits, and it should have been a little more equitable for everybody involved. So he had. I
agree. Well, Roger Waters, I have to. I'm going to say it now. I'll probably say it once. I won't say it again in the episode.
Well, let me ask you before you say it. Now, that'll lead into your answer. Are you team Gilmore?
I knew you were going to ask.
Or team Waters?
I'm going to go with Gilmore, even though because Gilmore, I mean, I think he's the better musician overall. I think Waters had the songwriting, he had the lyrics, he had the concepts, but his stuff just became so depressing and he was a bastard. I mean, he's I think actually Phil Collins, of all people, called him a miserable F, like he's such a miserable bastard, especially now in his old age. He's really he's just, the guy doesn't like anything. Like he's very critical. He's very, and that came over time. Like after, like you could see that happening, and
Yeah.
a lot
More
of the
cynical. Everything got more cynical. And
every
I mean,
a lot more,
there was always that edge to it, but it
yeah.
kind of really, by the time you get to the wall and the final cut,
And he was arrogant. He, everything was no, it's all mine. It's like he took the credit for a lot of the stuff, and Gilmour, there's that, and then it just developed this big feud between the two, and they just couldn't stand working with one another. Yeah. And it's a shame, really, because when you consider what was done, their best stuff arguably came from, I think, metal to probably Animals at this point. Before the Wall, like the 70s for me, that was
the album Metal.
Pink Floyd. Yeah,
okay.
The album Metal, right. So you have Metal, you got Dark Side, you have Wish You Were Here, and you have Animals. Those albums are, to me, like the peak of Floyd. When I think of Pink Floyd, I think the 70s more so than the psychedelic era, even though they were doing some pretty cool stuff there.
Up to and including The Wall.
Yeah. Well, The Wall, I mean, it was different. It was I personally think the album's overrated, to be honest. People like favor it.
Shots fired.
Shots fired, but I it doesn't, I don't think it compares to this album.
It's totally different. It's a different
vibe, a different feel. Yeah. It's more of it's definitely like a stage play type of thing, right? It's
more
like
of a
more
statement.
Of a concept. Yeah.
Absolutely.
The music is of its time too, because you got this more sort of like funky kind of stuff happening on that album, and they're starting to sort of change with the times at the late 70s, and then it to me it wasn't as like, they weren't as together as they are in this work. Even Wish You Were Here, I love as well. It's like that's the follow up to Dark Side. I actually liked that album better at one point, but I go back and forth.
So if you were gonna tell somebody, just one Pink Floyd album, it would be this one, or would it be The Wall, just because of the popularity of The Wall and accessibility of The Wall?
I think because Dark Side of the Moon, if forget Pink Floyd, you want to have an experience. And go with Dark Side of the Moon.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it transcends far above and beyond the band. I mean, it's something that I don't think they even thought that they were going to do as good. I think their expectation was probably not as great as what the finished product turned out to be. And that's like, call it lightning in a bottle, call it what you will, but it's one of those special.
I think you can call it lightning in a bottle, because their next few albums didn't do anything, did not even come close to the impact that this album had, and obviously it was still on the charts while those other albums were coming and going. So, so let's get into this album. So, one of the first things you realize or see about this album is it is probably one of the most iconic album covers ever. It's a simple design, which they wanted. They didn't want anything overblown. So they got with Storm Thorgerson, who, wow.
Yeah.
Look him up on Wikipedia and look at the stuff that he's done. He's worked with everybody. He did the first 3 ELO albums. He's worked with old artists, new artists. He is just and all different types of looks. I mean, he worked on Paul McCartney, Pipes of Peace. So many different artists and so many different types of albums. So they said to him, we want just something simple.
Yeah. Thorgerson, I'm going to spell his last name, Thorgerson, or you could look up under the company name that he founded, which was Hypnosis.
Yep.
And they, like Dean was saying, they're incredible. That's my favorite iconic album artwork of all. This company that they did Genesis, they did Peter Gabriel,
they did Styx, they've done everything under
absolutely
the sun.
Amazing stuff. Yeah.
So they said, we want something simple, and really you don't get much something as simple as a prism with one beam of light going through and a rainbow coming out the other side, and it just became a simple iconic image. And if you're a beginning artist and you're into music, it's probably something that you've replicated yourself in art class, because you can kind of do it very simply and get it done. So it started with that. And again, they were experimenting with songs on the road and kind of working them out, and then figuring out what can be discarded and thrown away to make it to whittle it down to something usable. they also interviewed friends and road crew and recorded the interviews, ask them like kind of random questions like, what is death? Or are you afraid to die? Or this, that, and the other thing. And they just got all these random answers. And that's when you hear the talking throughout this album, it's those responses.
Yeah.
You don't necessarily know what the questions are, but they're the responses to the questions. So they're put together in such a way that it sounds almost like some type of a narrative, but they just simply ask their road crew like these random questions.
Yeah. Their road manager, who is the father of Naomi Watts, the actress. And he's the guy that said in the beginning where he says, I've been mad for fucking years. And, like that's him, or it might've been actually, no, you know what? Scratch that. I think he's the one that's doing the maniacal laughing. The laughing. I think the other thing is I think a roadie or something like that.
Yeah, there's a couple of different guys that they use. So it's kind of an interesting, all these different things kind of coming together. And the album proper has 10 tracks on it. For all intents and purposes, it actually only has 2 tracks. Because the album starts, side 1 is all intertwined. The songs meld into each other and flow, and then the only reason they probably don't all flow is because you had to turn the album over back then. So then it starts side 2, and then that whole thing, like you had said earlier, like a suite, which is interesting because they're not positioning it that way of, oh, here's this, and we're connecting them. Each song has a different title.
They're not calling it that.
And you wouldn't know it if you just looked at the tracks. You'd be like, okay, here's the songs, but they all flow into each other seamlessly on each side. So you don't.
And that all came together with the editing and just putting things together. They, like you mentioned before, they were working up stuff live, little snippets of little pieces that they would sort of take and put together, and some things were longer, they cut it, and the album just kind of came out the way it did, and it wasn't really intended, I think, in necessarily in the order that it turned out to be.
Yeah.
So they're if they're calling it a suite, it just flows. It is,
and that's what makes it such a great listen. This is really. We say it a lot on other episodes, but this one really, I mean, I don't think there's any exception. You can't really drop the needle, or you don't really want to drop the needle in the middle of this record at all. There's no reason to, because you're not. Like, oh, I'm going to listen to On the Run. Okay, great. But why?
Right.
You need to.
It's not a song per se.
Exactly.
It's just a piece. It's just a piece of.
But it is a song. It's like a song, but it's not, because
it's a track. It has a title, but it is just a piece of.
It is a piece of the whole larger puzzle, right? That's what it is. Is you're not going to be able to aside from Money, the two that were singles, and I said those are pretty much the only 2 songs that you could potentially listen to on their own.
Yeah.
And kind of get something from, but you really still don't want to. It's like there's no reason to. When I listened to this album, like, I don't know, 3 or 4 times in the run up.
Yeah.
And each time I listen, I'm like, like this needs to be just, you got to sit. This is what we talked about when we said music was becoming made to be listened to. And that's what this is. And maybe and people obviously in 73, I'm sure there was a lot of people with the black lights and the blue, or the blue lights and the posters and whatever they were using to enhance the trip. But you don't need to do that to enjoy this as well. You can just put your headphones on and go in on it.
What was your first experience with the album? When was the first time you heard it?
I couldn't tell you. I do remember. Funny thing is, when we used to work for Suncoast, which is a now defunct video store. When we used to have new people, new teammates starting, and we would have to show them the loss prevention video. They used the beginning of Money in the video, like because showing how people steal. Like, we'd have to show a video about how people steal.
That's right.
CDs and movies and stuff, and the video would start with the cash register thing of Money. So like that was kind of like the most commercial.
So perfectly timed, so perfectly. Yeah, that was so great.
Because it was about stealing, but it was.
If you're not familiar with the track Money, it starts off with these sound effects of a cash register, and I think Roger Waters was throwing change into a bowl, and it's all done like it's really timed, and it's really and it becomes a rhythm. which I'm all about rhythm. So it kind of takes on this 7-part rhythm that it just keeps looping over and over. And then the bass kicks in.
Yep.
So great.
And then you gave me, when the Final Cut came out, their last album,
Yeah.
you got it on cassette.
Yeah.
And I don't think you cared for it too much. You're like, it's just a piece of junk or whatever.
It was.
So you threw it my way. And there was that one song that I really liked, which was Not Now John.
Not
I
Now
think we
John,
both like that.
which was Gilmore. Yeah.
The
best song on the
that
album.
was kind of, and then outside of like The Wall, obviously another brick in the wall, when that song came out in 79 or whatever it was, I mean, it was just everywhere. I mean, Pink Floyd just kind of, but it was weird because there was not really a follow-up that was a hit. But Another Brick in the Wall was just such a monster hit.
It was, and it was so taken out of context too. I remember when it first came out, my mom, I remember what is this? You're talking about school, and how dare like what that's not what there's it's not really what the song's about, Ma. You got to experience the whole album.
Yeah,
I had to kind of explain the whole thing to her, and
explaining The Wall to your mother.
I don't know what you're talking about, and like. But yeah, my first experience with Dark Side. God, it was, I know I had the first time I heard the album, somebody played it for me. I think it was a cousin or something. It was 77, 78 around that time. And, but the first time I actually had the profound experience, I had it on vinyl. And that was the time, like you said, you put the headphones on. I actually turned the lights off. I've mentioned this before in a few episodes. That's the best way to listen, but it terrified me. I ended up, it scared the living crap out. I because a lot of the stuff you just didn't expect, because I didn't hear it the first time.
Yeah.
Right. You just heard like bits and pieces, and I wasn't really paying attention, more or less. But when I put it on and I experienced like that, and you hear all the nuances and the voices, and it just scares the living hell out of you. Like when the screaming and the and then
it's an auditory trip. It really is.
Just when people talking about death and this, it's such a young age. It's like, why am I listening to this? But it was it was a trip.
Yeah.
And no, I didn't. I never. And that's the thing. It's like a lot of their music obviously is associated with the drug culture and that kind of thing. Or you can't listen to this stuff without that. And I totally disagree with that. I think you could still have a profound experience with this stuff.
Absolutely. And appreciate what they did too.
Exactly.
I mean, that's the whole thing is when you listen to it now, I'm listening to it and I'm just amazed by it as a piece of music.
Yeah.
As one side of just, because you again, like we said, with progressive rock, it can get pretentious and overblown and
long-winded,
keyboard solos that never end.
That's right. Yeah.
And organs that never end and all that kind of stuff. So to be able to rein it in, but still deliver those things. And that's the thing, is this is not like, this is not wimpy progressive rock. There's some, like I said, some intense themes, fear of flying, just life and getting older, brain damage, refers to Syd Barrett and his struggles. So there's a lot of like creepy stuff, but ultimately very listenable. And I think the reason why is most of the tracks were written by Roger Waters. But the good thing, and people might give me grief for it, the good thing about it is he doesn't sing on most of the album, even though he's the primary lyricist. David Gilmour gets the lion's share of the vocals, and I think that is so important.
Yeah,
because his voice is calming.
I'm going to say it. He's got the better voice.
His voice is very calming on this album, even when he's singing in a little bit of a more forceful mode.
That's right.
It's still like this. It kind of washes over you, like Time, like songs like Time and Us and Them. It just kind of it kind of comes over you like a blanket, and he just kind of brings you along. And then the saxophone comes in on the Us and Them. It's just like this, just so many different things going on.
I think Waters knew that going in. I think when they were recording this thing, and I think the mood of it and what they were doing, I think he understood, and him and Rick Wright. Gilmour and Rick Wright both had similar vocals, like their voices were, so when they harmonized, you could swear it's Gilmour being multi-tracked, but it's, it's like, especially on Time, that's Richard Wright singing with Gilmour. I totally agree. That's why that's why I said he's the better musician. Vocally, his guitar playing is astounding. He could hit notes that just take you, that just, blast off into the stratosphere. I mean, the way he
very underrated nowadays,
singled up, but played in a way that is not like, he's not a rock star type of guitar player. He's not like, flashy. It's for effect. It's for, this kind of thing, and bringing it into experimentation. And even though in the live setting, it's like, wow, you're there.
I put Gilmour in like the Clapton and Mark Knopfler kind of arena.
Yeah. They're more
like
of the craftsmen.
Playing for feel and not for notes per minute type of thing. And there's nothing wrong with notes per minute, and it's got a place. But like Clapton, Gilmour, and Mark Knopfler, I put them into that finesse. They're finesse players.
Yeah.
Right. And that's what with this, if those solos were like ripping and blazing all over, it would have been like, no, like, that's when it would have gotten into the pretentiousness. This was just the right.
That's not what Floyd's all about.
Yeah. Really, just the right flow that this album has. And that's the thing, is it just kind of, it's almost like getting into a small rowboat and someone just kind of pushes you gently into the water and you just start going.
Like, it's ironic you say that.
You're not rowing, but you're just kind of, the current just kind of takes you, and that's what this album is.
It's ironic that you say that, because in a lot of their live shows, they do have that image of
really?
Water, and there's somebody in a boat, like being.
I never saw them.
No, I never saw them either. I saw them separate. I saw Waters on the Pros and Cons tour, which was his first solo album, post Wall.
Pros and Cons of Hitchhiking.
Yeah, and I missed out because the first leg of the tour, Clapton actually played with him, but I got to see the second leg, which was Andy Farrow the Low.
Even better. I'll go with.
There you go.
AFL is the man.
There you go.
You don't know him.
But then I saw Gilmour on the About Face tour at the Pier, which was but that was more of sort of a straightforward rock. But he did a lot of Floyd, and of course Waters put on the show, because I saw him at Radio City, so he had the stage. It was like seeing Pink Floyd. It had like the wall. First half of the show was like Pink Floyd stuff, and then the second half was
and he pretty much
the entire album.
And he pretty much Waters pretty much takes the wall out now. That's his thing, or that was his big thing.
He never gives up on that album, because that's his bread and butter. I mean, it's his Gilmour, he took Floyd into a new direction. He refused to give up the name, and I think musically speaking, what he did in the later years was more true to what they did in around this time period. It's more, it's not probably lyrically not as good, maybe but
more atmospheric and more like that more feel.
Exactly, yeah.
And not as like biting that, Waters has that bite to him, to the lyrics, and also to his delivery sometimes, and that's with Dark Side of the Moon, even he's reined in on his songs, Brain Damage. He strikes the right kind of sense of paranoia on Brain Damage. And that's one of the Brain Damage. You may not know it by the title, but you'll know the song. It starts off with the Lunatics Are on the Grass.
Yeah.
It is one of the quintessential Floyd. I never got to see Floyd. The closest I came, and this was a big thing back in the day, was Laser Floyd. I don't know if they do laser shows for people of a certain age. Laser shows were the thing. They would always be held in planetariums. And if you don't know what a planetarium is, we're going way back. But they used to, a planetarium is basically like a domed theater where you would go see stuff about the constellation. So it would be like you were looking up in the stars, and they would show you different things. When they weren't doing that, enterprising individuals came up with these laser light shows, and they would hook it up, and you would go, and they would do Laser Floyd and Led Zeppelin and all these different things. I don't know if they still do them, but I saw Laser Floyd like in the early 80s. Yeah, I was not prepared. I didn't know much about Floyd, so I was like, oh, we're going to see Laser.
I saw it with you. I saw it with, that was when we were in the
Went
Explorers.
to the city.
Yeah.
It was like Laser Floyd at midnight or something crazy like that, and we're laying back, and it's just like Welcome to the Machine and all this crazy.
That's what started. Welcome to the Machine was the first track.
Oh,
and
I remember.
Blew me away. And it was loud. It was great.
Yeah.
I
walked out
fantastic.
like crap in my pants. I'm like, I don't know what the hell just happened to me, but. So laser shows were the big thing. So that was my closest interaction. Or I did see Andy Fairweather Low live in Clapton. So those are byproducts. But getting back to this album is just it starts off with and the funny thing is Speak to Me is kind of like a little intro song, very but it kind of has all the elements of what you're about to hear. There are so many within that beginning, there are so many callbacks to other songs.
Right.
You hear the cash register from Money.
You hear the laughing.
The heartbeat starts off, but it's also at the end of Eclipse. The clock ticking is heard in the song Time. The Peter Watts, you said Naomi Watts' father, that laughing is heard in this part, but you don't hear it again until Brain Damage.
Yeah.
Claritoria, we need to talk about Claritoria.
Oh, absolutely.
Great Gig in the Sky. So we'll get that. You hear some of her vocalizations in this. So the kind of the beginning song, Speak to Me, kind of is almost like a prologue at the beginning. Because it's giving you everything that you're going to hear, but it gives it to you at the beginning. You don't realize what it is. When you listen to it again, you're like, oh wait, that was in that familiar other song there. Like you don't, you have to listen to it again to realize that you heard it after the fact. So it's a very interesting album. If you're not into Pink Floyd, you got to listen to it. And if you want something different, you have to listen to this album because it's just one of those ones that you're never going to know if you don't watch, if you're listening on Spotify and you're not looking at the songs, you're not going to know when one ends and one begins. So you're going to think, oh, when's the next song? You'll never get that till you get to Money.
That's right. Yeah.
Because there are no gaps. The songs are just seamless and they have echoes of the previous song in the next song. So it flows seamlessly where you don't really realize that you're into something else, which is, they really pulled it off brilliantly. It wasn't a gimmick. No. And when we get to the last song on the first side, which is Great Gig in the Sky, which is really for the most part an instrumental song.
It is
right? Done by Richard Wright. And
it's a beautiful melody that he plays on the piano, this little noodling thing, and it's really simple but effective, and it just really
it starts building.
It's melancholy, and then all of a sudden, this vocalist comes in. This a lady named Claritoria, and man, does she go to town on this song?
Well, the funny thing about Claritoria is when they she was suggested by Alan Parsons. See, and they don't give him enough credit, right? They were looking for somebody to do vocalization. So Alan Parsons was like, I saw this woman on TV, or she did some other stuff, so let's get her. They bring her in. And they're kind of like, well, we're looking for kind of like sensual, not necessarily sexual sounds, but that kind of a thing. So she starts singing like, ooh, baby, and oh, ah. And they're like, no.
No words.
Not that.
Not right.
That's not the kind of stuff we're looking for. So then she says, okay, well, let me think of my instrument as a voice. And then you get the Great Gig in the Sky. And you get some vocalizations that are just,
it is, well, I mean, let's
off the charts.
It's off the charts. And let's be honest. I mean, we say they didn't want this sort of sexual, thing, but it does kind of build up that way, doesn't it? Like it's
absolutely.
Almost like
to a crescendo,
or if you
we'll leave it at that.
Yeah. But the song itself is supposed to be about death and like,
the Great Gig in the Sky. That's
exactly.
It, yeah.
So, it really takes you to this whole level of and it's completely wordless. There's no words. It's just vocal, and it's
vocalizations and sounds. And it's funny when you know what she said, where she said, I'm going to think of my voice as an instrument. Then then it totally makes sense with what she's doing. And it's like, yes, this is the same thing as playing a guitar or playing a bass or playing a keyboard. The funny thing is they paid her like flat, $60 for the session or whatever.
Yeah.
Wasn't until many years later, she's like, you know what? I kind of contributed to that. I kind of contributed to the writing because of my vocalizations. That is a part of the song. So she, took him to court. They settled. So I'm sure she got paid and then she got credit.
She got credit post 2005 when
and rightly
subsequent re-releases.
Her contribution was not to be It wasn't like she did a couple of oohs and ahs and then left. I mean, she was really almost the centerpiece. Once she got cooking, she was the centerpiece of that song, and she provided the melody or whatever she was providing with her instrument.
Think of it as it could be like, well, it could be anything really. A guitar. It could have been a saxophone. It could have been
her voice.
It was a trumpet, whatever. It was the human voice. And that's something that, a lot of people take for granted, I think, in terms of just thinking of it as an instrument. People like, oh, the tone, it's all about, sometimes it's about the words and the lyrics and that, but in this case,
it's about the feeling, and she rips. You want to hear a vocalist really, I mean, I think they said it was 3 sessions that they stitched together, and she really gave it all.
She was embarrassed by it. I think she said that.
Yeah, she didn't think she did a good job.
Well, she was. I think I did it. I went a little bit too overboard. She was like really, really embarrassed by it, but they loved it. The rest of the band. I think Gilmore was actually in charge of that session because I think initially they had asked her to do it, and she
wanted to go to a Chuck Berry concert.
She wanted to go to a Chuck Berry concert. That's right, and she
like,
said no.
I can't. What?
So they had to reschedule, and Gilmore. Gilmore was in charge of the session. I'm not going to perform and
get paid. I want to go see Chuck Berry at the Hammersmith Odeon or wherever he was. Can we do this on Sunday? So they rescheduled for her,
right? And maybe she thought that it was just she thought she was just going to contribute some backing vocals to something, which is
basically what she did.
But there are backing vocalists on this album as well, but not certainly not to the level that she or the contribution that she made was absolutely astounding. Yeah.
On side 1, another popular song is "Time,"
which is my favorite.
The big thing about this song nowadays, we talk about reaction videos. There's a lot of reaction videos on YouTube of people listening to this, and crying at the end by the time it's done.
Mm-hmm.
Because of the lyrical, the lyrical content, about kind of.
I've done it at karaoke,
starting and not hearing the gun go off, and 10 years go by your life and you don't realize it. It really is about
you've missed the starting gun, and it's a cautionary piece about live your life to the fullest. Don't waste your life. It before you know it, it's here. Yeah. I don't see it as, I see it as that. I don't see it as like a depressing piece of music. I think it's a gorgeous piece of music, frankly. And I've actually, our friend Andy, him and I used to do it at karaoke a lot. He would take the Gilmore part and I take Rick Wright's part. I take the, it's not the kind of song you play, you want to sing at karaoke and people are like, what the, but we just loved it so much that it's just, yeah. But,
so when you get to side 2, and of course it opens with "Money," which is one of the probably premier Pink Floyd songs. There's not a ton of them, That's the thing, is Pink Floyd is so well regarded, but there's not a ton of like songs that kind of stand out. It's just a handful, but a lot of them are on this album, "Money," and then it goes right into "Us and Them," which is classic Floyd, and it happens to be the longest song on there, but it's just got that. Like by the time you get to "Us and Them," I think you're in the mode, and you're you're right in the right headspace. And like I said earlier, like when that sax kicks in, and it's just so like you're hearing so many different things on this album that you're not, from the alarm clocks and time, like blowing your ears out and kind of waking you up and scaring you, to then having something like "Us and Them," where it's just, you're floating away on this really light, gentle saxophone playing and this mellow guitar. And it's just such a great
at that point
vibe.
You're floating.
I can understand why people were wasted in listening to. I mean, I totally get it. I totally understand. I'm not like,
but like you say, you get to that point in the album where you literally feel like you're floating. You're just, and you're right. Those little nuances just kind of just wash over you, and it's like going one ear and out the other, and it's just, and then, then of course it's been re-released so many times. Like there's a quadraphonic version of it where the mix is different, and if you have that kind of equipment, that's great. But I think just the best way to listen to it is the vinyl, the original, vinyl with the headphones. I mean, there's just nothing like that experience.
I'm still on the hunt for a nice vinyl. Like I'm not in a rush.
Yeah. I
It's
wish
like
I
one of
still
those
had
ones,
my copy. Yeah.
and the prices are going up on it. So it's like when I find the right used copy, I'm going to pull the trigger. So I'm kind of like, I want it, but I'm not rushing to get it because I'm not just going to buy like a crappy copy to have. I'm like, I'm going to make sure I kind of pull the trigger the right way. And then of course, Brain Damage, which we finally hear from Roger Waters, and it's got some Syd Barrett references in there. If the band starts playing different tunes, I'll See You on the Dark Side of the Moon. That's a direct reference to when he started to break down, and play concerts. And he would start playing something different, or he would start to slowly detune his guitar while he was playing, or play one chord over and over. And it is, like you said, that haunting, the shadow that Syd Barrett cast on the band.
Yeah.
Because then they would memorialize him again in Shine On You Crazy Diamond as well. So it's just kind of, he was just kind of, subject matter for this as well, for this cautionary tale, and just and it goes
it's
into
amazing what you can
I
mean, just sitting down and writing these pieces just based on that, just based on one person's decline is it's a testament to geeks like myself who I don't like to reveal that much about myself, but I was very introverted as a kid. I was all very isolated. I this kind of stuff, this was the kind of stuff that I retreated to and listened to because it was just so odd and so weird. And it was almost like my punk rock in a way, when punk rock to me was, expose myself to a lot of this kind of stuff. And then when punk rock did come out, I didn't understand it. Right. You're kind of like, what is the big deal about punk rock? I almost feel like I became somewhat of a snob in a way because I've been listening to all this lush, well-produced material that I just didn't get the 3-chord raw thing that these guys are not great musicians. It's like, I want to listen to something.
Yeah. What's all this crunchy stuff? And
exactly, and I
distorted.
just didn't get it. I didn't get it, but that's all right. I mean, I don't, I might have missed out on some things when they first came out, and that's in that regard, but I don't regret, the things that I got into myself. And,
the beautiful thing about it, the music isn't going anywhere. It's still there to be discovered. Exactly. So it's not like it's passed you by and you're never going to be able to witness it or experience it. So as we begin to close out, so I have a question for you at the end, so we'll save that.
Okay.
But the legacy of this album carries through the sales and through all the compact disc era. And again, it stayed on the charts for umpteen years and is still on the charts.
Yeah.
But then there was this phenomenon in the mid 90s.
Yeah. I know where you're going. I know where
you're
going.
Called Dark Side of the Rainbow. And whoever, I can't trace the actual start of it, but basically what someone figured out, or this is the theory, is that if you put on the movie The Wizard of Oz, and I believe it starts with the MGM with the lion roar. I believe if you start Dark Side of the Moon on the third roar, the music on Dark Side of the Moon will sync with the movie The Wizard of Oz, and that became a thing back in the day. Of trying to link it up, and certain lyrics will be spoken at the time that match with things on the screen. Certain sound effects in the album will correspond with certain things happening in the movie. So this became like a mild sensation, and then everybody started, and that's when we worked at Suncoast, and people were coming in buying The Wizard of Oz and asking if we had Dark Side of the Moon as well to pair it up to listen to. And we did it. I did it a couple times, and we used to sync it up. But all you have to do is go to the original people involved, and none of them say that this was what we were doing. Alan Parsons said there was never a copy of Wizard of Oz there, as far as I know. Yeah.
It's just one of those happenstances that somebody had the time to do this, to sit down and put this together. And it's metaphorical. It's if you really want to go there, it is like, it's like that. It's like a synchronous kind of thing where one thing is happening, but like the music reflects it. It doesn't have to match up in the sense where it's not like for example, like the cyclone in the Wizard of Oz. That
Yeah.
you don't hear a tornado on the album. It's not like you hear
Yeah.
something else. You might hear at that point some voice or somebody screaming, perhaps, or maybe get Great in the Sky at that point of the movie or whatever. But it just somehow fit. It's somehow somebody thought that this fits. This works together. This melds together. I don't know. Yeah, I think it's cool, but I never really bought into the whole thing.
The easiest way to debunk it is if that was the case.
Yeah.
Why wasn't the album as long as the movie? Why would you stop, 40 minutes or however long the album? Why would you stop 40 minutes in and not continue? Why wouldn't you make a double album and do it? So, and again, all the members are like, this is just a hogwash and not really.
We didn't write a soundtrack to Wizard of Oz.
To Wizard of Oz.
And that might be the thing. It's like you notice that a lot of artists too, they, especially in this vein, they'll go back and they'll record music for like silent films that have lost their soundtracks over the years. Like, they're unrecoverable, or they're so far gone that they need a new score, that kind of thing. And you see like these kinds of artists doing that. So I think that's kind of neat when well,
one of the most famous ones was Giorgio Moroder did it with Metropolis.
Yeah.
And yeah, Freddie Mercury had all these artists, and they kind of did a updated, and that was back in the 80s. So it's not so recent. Jeez. It's like, oh yeah, recently. Okay, 1980.
I know. I think another example is Adrian Utley of Portishead did music for, like, I think it was the Joan of Arc, like the silent film, The Passion of Joan of Arc. Yeah, he did a score for that. I don't know if it was like released as such, but I think he might have been doing it just for an experiment or whatever. But that's cool. Like they would watch a film and you could put your music to it and you give your own interpretation of what that is and the imagery. And so I don't know if it came from that. I don't know if that might have been where that came from with the Wizard of Oz in that sense. I
think it's some dude that had too much time on his hands and maybe a little too much
drugs.
Yeah.
Probably.
Like his girlfriend was watching Wizard of Oz and he had like Dark Side of the Moon on in the headphones and it just like synced up and he's like, holy crap, man.
Maybe.
They did it. I found it. So anyway, the question I have as our resident prog expert.
Okay.
And you kind of started to touch on it at the beginning, but I don't know if you answered it. Is this the best prog album of all time?
I think
take into consideration not just the music, but take into consideration its impact. 14 years consecutively on the charts without ever leaving the album charts, and then re-entering the charts for another 15 years.
Yeah, I could definitely confidently say yes. Absolutely, it is. It's more than just, like I said. It's bigger than the band. It's bigger than everyone involved. It is definitely it just rises above that. They did something really special here, and it will go on as the experiment that it is. And I don't think it's ever going to really die. Hey, check this out. I mean, people are to this day are still influenced by it. A lot of these newer prog bands today that are I think even people like Radiohead and they're still referring to Dark Side as their grand influence, and I think that's going to continue. Yeah, it's just it's quite the experience. Yeah,
I don't think you've heard it here first, but you heard it here. I don't think he may not be the first one, but he's the definitive word on our podcast about it. So greatest prog album of all time, better than Styx, better than Yes, better than ELP, better than Genesis, King Crimson, Marillion, all those guys. Stack them up.
Well, I think a lot of it has to. Let's give some credit to Alan Parsons. Let's give it to the recording, way ahead of its time.
Yeah, for 73.
Right? And you were hearing sounds on this record that people are still employing today.
Yeah.
In a more modern setting, and to me it sounds this album already did it. Like I hear stuff on that sounds like Floyd. I mean, they did that. The use of the keyboards was not antiquated in such a way.
If you want a direct example, you can look up Queensryche and their song "Silent Lucidity." If you want if you want a direct Pink Floyd influence from this album.
Yeah.
Silent Lucidity. And you know what? We'll link that in the show notes. So you can check out something, a very recent, relatively recent influence that really you can hear the Pink Floyd influence in. So that's going to do it for this episode of the 3324 podcast. Pink Floyd, Dark Side of the Moon. Absolutely take the trip with them. It's going to be worth it. Sit down, give yourself 45 minutes of your own time and put your headphones on and take the audio trip with them. We guarantee you will not be disappointed in this one. So you can find us, like I said earlier, on social media. Check us out there. Find us on social media. Say hi to us. We love to interact with you. We love meeting new people online and having new people interact and post. So go ahead and do that. Feel free. Join us there, won't you? We would love to see you. For Eric, this has been Dean. Thanks for joining us. We will see you on the flip side.